Yeah, so now that we took a look at project management as an overall process, and we took a closer look at Boeing's background and their methods of project management, what we're actually going to do is dive into a particular challenge that Boeing was presented with during the construction of their 767. Just for some quick background on the challenge that we all probably know, but by 1981, the traditional three-person cockpits in airliners was being phased out in favor of a two-person cockpit. However, Boeing is far enough along in the production of their 767 that 30 of their planes will actually need sort of a special process to make that switch from three-person to two-person. Boeing really has two options. They've done a study and they've got two options on how to make that switch, one of which is inline, where they can actually follow their typical change management process, slow down the production of the entire run, and rebuild the 30 planes throughout the traditional production line, making them not as three-person cockpits, but doing them as two-person as part of production. The other option would be doing them sort of off the typical production line, offline, where they could continue the current production run, actually finish these 30 planes as three-person, and then retrofit and convert them to two-person later in a separate facility. And what we wanted to do was take a very close look at the pros and cons of the two choices and kind of point you in which direction we think Boeing should go. So the first thing we wanted to break out were the pros. And to begin with, we wanted to make pretty clear that there are a few things that fall on both ends of the scale. There's really no additional parts or scrap costs that are going to be undertaken for either choice due to the fact that Boeing has already purchased all of this stuff already. Additionally, there's going to be qualified research and experts either way we go. Boeing, as you saw previously, has a massive scale. They've got money to throw at this problem. They're going to make sure it gets done right either way it goes. But then when we look at the pros for the inline build, there's a couple that stick out. One, the Boeing engineers actually, we got a sense that they would prefer this method because it's typical. This is how Boeing traditionally does their change management, and so it felt odd for them to do it the other way. So the engineers are on the side of the inline build, at least it seems that way. Additionally, you have, what's the next point? There you go. Yeah, so it's one installation. There's not really, I'll have that next time, but there's no real concern about integrity, or not as much of a concern, because you're going to be doing it all at once. You're not simply building something for the sake of ripping it up and replacing it. And again, as I mentioned, it's the traditional process. It's really what Boeing is used to. It's what they always do when they make changes on their planes. It would be very rare for them to build everything and then replace it. They've traditionally replaced things in line. Now, on the flip side, there are additional pros to the offline build. The big one, when we talk about inline, it was that there would be delays. You'd actually have to slow down this traditional production run. The offline build, no delays. They've got their plan in place. They know exactly what they would normally do, and they continue to build the 30 planes as they normally would, so it doesn't get delayed. On top of that, because of these, the lack of delays, Boeing's learning curve stay in place. Now, the learning curve is just how Boeing plans out the efficiency of production. They know about how much better they will get from one plane to the next. They've done a lot of study, they've built a lot of planes, and by keeping the production run intact as they planned it, you won't mess that up. And finally, we thought probably the biggest advantage of the offline build was efficient testing. So by going with their traditional process and doing it in line, they would actually run a risk of testing sort of fragmented. They'd have to test different parts at different times. They'd have to delay testing overall because they have to rebuild the planes from the beginning. Whereas if you do it offline, you do all your testing as you normally would. You build your 30 planes, you test them as you normally would. Then when you replace the cockpits, you can go back and do kind of single one-off testing, and you can pinpoint the problem. So it would be efficient and safe for testing. And with all of those advantages, we lean towards the offline build. We thought that with testing, learning curves maintained, and lack of production delays outweighed the fact that it was a traditional process that the engineers were more of a fan of. Now both choices did have some cons, but for the most part they balanced out at the same time. So they're both going to cost additional labor hours. There are modifications. There's integrity questions. But really you're going to be facing those either way you go. The one other thing to note about the offline build that we'll talk about in our action plan is that there is some requirement for additional space. Boeing has a massive production facility, but it's not massive enough to just park 30 planes in, so they do need an outdoor external facility that would require some additional fire plans and waivers, but that will be part of the action plan. So ultimately, when we compared the pros and cons, we're going to be going with the offline build. And then next, oh, yeah.
Real quick, I talked to Sarah and we're going to probably change a little bit.
Okay.
Just have some of the cons pop up with the pros.
Okay.
So you don't have to go pros first and then cons. You can kind of talk about them all kind of simultaneously.
Okay, that should be fine. All right, now how do we want to get that done?
All right.
Oh, we're going to look at a plan. And that should solve our problem. No, so the first thing, of course, we need to communicate this. You know, as I mentioned, there were some reservations by engineers and Boeing managers that this would be a little bit out of the norm, that it just didn't feel right to build planes and then rip them up. So we have to communicate. We have to talk about the pros. We have to talk about the long-term plan, the production run. So we're going to meet with managers and engineers to announce, and then we're going to ensure, you know, that they're distributing that information to the appropriate people. Next, we actually do have to build this external production facility, for lack of a better phrase. We have to kind of develop a parking plan for all 30 planes to figure out how they're going to crisscross and match in a fairly small area. We also have to get, the next thing should be up by now, but we'll have to get you know, fire waivers and get a fire plan in place. You know, we've done some research that doesn't look like it will be a big hurdle, but obviously it's something that we have to do. And then we have to get started. Once we've gotten these, this is a quick turnaround. You know, we've told our airlines that have already put orders in that this will be 1 month delay. So with 30 planes to retrofit, we've got to get on the ground and get working. And then, of course, we have to continue to manage that process. It's something where, as we mentioned, you know, we've got a plan in place, we've got a process to retrofit these planes, but that has to be fluid. We might have to go back and re-examine if things don't work. So provide support and resources for the team, and then once we've done all the modifications, have to test. You know, that was one of the big things that Boeing stresses, is it has to be safe, it has to be perfect, and so they'll have to go back and do that testing to make sure everything is in there perfect. And then once that's done, we've got 30 planes, fit perfectly with 2-person cockpits, ready to deliver.
So, I'll go over that.
Are you done there?
Yeah, do you want me to transition, and John will take us home with, you know, final key thoughts and takeaways?